Hi, fifth graders. This is kind of a funny way to meet, but let's try it. I'm David Schweidel. If we get to talk in person, call me David. I started teaching poetry in Ms. Goyen's class many years ago. I have two daughters. Both of them had Ms. Goyen for fifth grade, and now they've both graduated from college. One's in graduate school at Cal, down the street from Cragmont, and one is working here in the Bay Area for a startup in Oakland. I also teach writing to adults, and I work at the business school at Stanford teaching communication to the graduate students. So I've been working with kids and adults for a long time. And usually the first time I come in to do poetry, this is when I ask each student to tell me their name and just one fact about themselves. Doesn't have to be anything, could be anything. I'll tell you that I'm left-handed. That's not that interesting. Okay, I'll tell you that I love to eat cereal at night and before I go to bed. And I like to mix my cereals. I have a little shredded wheat, maybe Cheerios or Corn Flakes, some granola. Almost always have raisins, and if there's any other fruit around, strawberries, raspberries, bananas, I'll put those in there too. And I think I got that habit from my dad, who tried to teach me a lot of things, but the one thing I learned was to eat cereal at night. So, what do you think of when you think of poetry? And I realize you can't really answer me right now, but take a moment. Poetry, what do you think? I know in Ms. Goyen's class you may have already written an I am poem, and in Ms. Moniz's class, I don't know if that's an assignment you've had or not, but I bet you've read some poems, talked about poetry, heard about poetry at least a little bit before now. I'm going to tell you why I like poetry. To me, it's different from all the other subjects you study in school. In most subjects, the idea is to get the same answer as everyone else. If you get asked, what's 6 times 7? You probably better come up with 42. And if you say, no, for me, 6 times 7 is 86. That doesn't really work in math. But in poetry, the idea is to find your own answer. The answer only you could come up with. So one thing I love about poetry is that it has so many right answers. Almost anything can become a poem. So I'm going to read you a poem, and then we can talk about it. It's called How to Eat a Poem. Don't be polite, bite in. Pick it up and eat the juice that may run down your chin. It is ready and ripe now whenever you are. You do not need a knife or fork, or spoon, or plate, or napkin, or tablecloth. For there is no core, or stem, or rind, or pit, or seed to throw away. How to eat a poem. So I'm going to show it to you. My hope is that you'll actually have a copy for yourself. Ooh, now that's interesting. My screen is reversing everything. You can still notice a few things about this poem, even with the letters backwards. The lines are of different lengths. There's a group of 4 lines and then a group of about 8 lines. And some lines have like 2 words, and some lines have a whole bunch of words. The group of lines is called a stanza. So I'll often ask, what do you notice about the poem? And I mean, how does it look to you, but also, what do you notice about what the poem means, how it sounds? And usually, someone will raise their hand and say, well, can you really eat a poem? And I'll say, well, I mean, literally one could, take the paper a poem was written on and eat it. I don't think it would be good for your stomach. But maybe the poem is about something else. What's the idea in the poem? It says, you don't need a knife or fork or spoon or plate or napkin or tablecloth. I was once in a restaurant. This was in France. I was traveling, and someone ordered an apple, I guess, because they brought an apple on a plate to this person sitting a few tables away, and the person with a knife and fork ate the apple. And in this poem, they're saying you don't need any of that. You just pick it up and bite in, and if it's messy, that's okay. And I think I like this poem because it reveals something about poetry, that poems can be about anything. A poem can be serious, a poem can be funny, a poem can be sad, and it doesn't have to make sense. Or sometimes a poem will make a certain kind of sense, but not in an obvious way. How to eat a poem. So this is our first time together, and the subject I want to really explore a little bit is noticing. To me, poetry begins with noticing. And maybe over the course of the weeks together, we'll try to figure out what are some of the ingredients of a poem. And things you notice, that's a primary ingredient of poems. And the great thing about noticing is that it's a skill you can get better at by practicing. And often you'll be going along and you won't really notice much of anything. But if you come to a stop and get quiet and maybe take a few deep breaths, you start to hear things or see things or smell things. Taste. Sometimes you can taste the air. And feel things. And of course, feel has 2 meanings. There's what you can feel. It's like I can feel my beard, what you feel with your fingers. But there's also what you feel inside. And sometimes when you stop, you notice things. And every other year I've done this. We've stopped in class and taken a full minute to be silent and listen for the quietest sound we can hear. And then we talk about what we've noticed. And I'm not going to wait a whole minute on this video, but I'll tell you something funny that happened. And I don't know if that clock is still in that classroom, but Ms. Goyen had a clock that actually went backwards sometimes. And when I was sitting through that minute and trying to notice, I was also looking at the clock now and then, watching the seconds tick by and hoping that a whole minute would pass before anyone started talking or broke the silence. And when the second hand moved backwards, I flipped out. Just inwardly, nobody could tell, but I thought, what is going on? Am I imagining that the second hand is going backwards? But that's what I noticed. And that sometimes something you notice can stay with you for years. You remember it. And if you put it in a poem, It can stay in someone else's mind for years. So here's a poem about noticing. It's called Snakeskin. I stop at an ordinary rock at the edge of a stream. 3 times I have found skins from a garter snake, strips of cloudy cellophane that let light shine through. Why do snakes pick this spot, this rock, among all others, to rub off their old skins? I decide to stop right here and unwrap my sandwich, rub my back against this rock, which feels amazingly solid, as good a place as any to make a new start. So the poem is about this person who goes out for a walk, stops at this rock where he's been before, and he's found the shedded skin of a garter snake there a few times. And while he's there, he kind of rubs his back against the rock and he unwraps his sandwich. And he thinks about making a new start. Why do you think unwrapping a sandwich is in the poem? Why do you think rubbing his back against a rock is in the poem? Sometimes I'll answer questions like that, but this time I'm just going to let those questions hang. But, and again, sorry it's backwards, but you can still see that this poem has groups of 3 lines. So each group is a stanza of 3 lines. And the lines are about the same length. So it's got a much more regular pattern than the first poem that we looked at. And sometimes poems have a regular pattern and sometimes they don't. There's a lot of possibilities with a poem. Sometimes they have punctuation, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they capitalize letters, sometimes they don't. Here's another poem. And all this poem does really is notice. In the snakeskin poem, noticing makes the poet start to think. Like a lot of times you're just noticing, and then what you notice gives you an idea. Or it raises a question. Why did the snake choose this place? So that's another ingredient of a poem. Things you notice and ideas. So this poem is called Ladybug. Little ladybug with your glazed red wings and small black polka dots, you look like a porcelain statue until suddenly you fly away. And this poem is kind of interesting on the page too. All the lines begin at the margin until the end, when away is actually away from the margin. And sometimes a poet will use the arrangement of words on the page to add to the meaning of the poem. And this poem is only one sentence, really. Little ladybug with your glazed red wings and small black polka dots, you look like a porcelain statue until suddenly you fly away. But what the poet does often is they break up the lines. They make you slow down. So there's only like 2. On some lines there's a few more. But as I said earlier, sometimes we don't notice anything until we slow down or come to a stop. And a lot of times what a poet is trying to do and the way they arrange the words on the page is to help you slow down and come to a stop and think about the meaning. And they'll put space between the words And in that space, you can have an idea. So here's one more poem. It's a little different. This poem was written by a sixth grader. It comes from a book I read that was about teaching poetry. When I first started doing this, I knew nothing about teaching poetry, so I read quite a few books. And I really like this poem. It's called My Own Little World. We go to the beach. I look at the sea. My mother thinks I stare. My father thinks I want to go in the water. But I have my own little world. I stare. I see myself. I walk along the beach. Not another soul but me. I walk to a white horse. Snowy is her name. I get on. I hold tightly to her mane. I nudge her slightly. She walks. The sun is setting. The sea is quiet. The sand is moist. The air is tender. The sky is all the colors of the rainbow. I kick her harder. My hair blows in the wind. On to the destiny of nothing. It seems endless. I think perhaps it is my own little world. Now, whether the poet actually saw a white horse at the beach, I guess that's up to each of us to decide for ourselves. But sometimes you can imagine a world, or you can be in a place that's quite real, and your imagination takes you somewhere far away. And when you write about that, you have the possibility of taking someone else to that place that's far away. You create that imagined world word by word, just by writing down the words. So now I'm going to give you an assignment, which is to write a poem. So you can write a poem about something you've noticed any time in your life, anything you've noticed, something that you paid attention to and noticed. Or you can write a poem about that feeling of being in your own little world. Where are you when you're in your own little world? Either way, try to put in the poem things that you see, things that you hear, things that you smell, things that you feel. The particular details of what you notice. And maybe there's a third option. If you don't remember noticing anything in particular, and if you don't want to imagine that place where you're in your own little world, just start with wherever you are when you begin writing and write down what you notice. Whatever's around you. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you feel? And that's a poem. To close, I'm going to read one of my favorite poems. It's about noticing, and it's about the ideas that come out of noticing, and it's got a grasshopper in it. And the poet describes the grasshopper in wonderful detail. And it's called The Summer Day. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean. The one who has flung herself out of the grass, the one who is eating sugar out of my hand, who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down, who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? So that's poetry. I hope you have a good week. Write some poems, notice some things, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.